doing Sim Kofei Sif Gimel. We talked today about Davar Gush. So last time we were doing our day, we said that Tam only transfers in a Klivishin, and there's like no Tam or almost no Tam transfers in a Klisheni. Okay, and we saw then that the reason was the difference between a Klivishin and a Klisheni is that in the Klivishin the walls are making the pot, the utensil is making the food hotter, and the Klisheni the walls of the pot are drawing heat away from the food. The Fanas Makaris is drawing heat away from it, Taisa says. And since they're drawing the heat away from the food, therefore the tam doesn't transfer, even though the food is outside this way. The heat is the same, just as hot in the Klivishin as the Klisheni, but the Klisheni functions different than the Klivishin, and therefore doesn't have this thing of being able to transfer tam. Okay, so this Veheter and the Marshal say, well, this idea that the Fanas Makaris, that because the walls are drawing away heat, it has different properties, that's only true. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize he wanted to come in. Sorry. Yeah, you come in. I didn't realize you wanted to be in here for whatever. I didn't realize you wanted to be here for this. Come, sit down.
No. The shear's at 9:30.
I'm in the middle. I already just started.
Oh.
Okay, so the Marshal and this had to say that since this idea that we should say define as Makaras is only, it's better if you sit over there because I can see both of you at the same and my screen. Is only if the food is in some kind of a liquid, so therefore the food has contact with the defanas. But if we have a Davar Gush, what we call Davar Gush, it's a solid food. Most of the food has no contact with this walls. The reason why it's not like a Klivishin is because the walls are pulling away heat from them. Over here, there's no walls because it's not even touching the walls, or doesn't have contact. Well, I shouldn't say it touches. It has no contact with the walls. Therefore, it's, even though it's not in a Klivishin, it still has this special din like a Klivishin. Even though it's not a Klivishin, this is a chumrah of the Heter, the Rashal say that we should be makvid to say that there's Klivishin, even though it's not in a Klivishin, it's a Davar Gush.
So, in a liquid, different molecules of liquid, moving around, each one touching the walls. The Davar Gush, some touches, but those few, that's it.
So some say it like that, and some say that has no shaykhs to the walls. There's different versions of how to explain the Marshal says. Okay. So the Ramah doesn't hold like that. The Ramah in a bunch of places says, no, it's not true, we're not makvid for that. The Taz says, also it's not true, it's only with Ducha the Sakina and it's a Davar Gush, and together we're makvid and things like that. But the Mishabura goes along with what the Shach says, the Magen Avram says. We're going to get back to this Magen Avram soon. And others say that you should be makvid for it. Okay, the Chacham, I'll read you the words he says. The Chacham says, V'hine mamish kol ha'achronim hishkimu le'isv heter marshal the Davar Gush, that whatever that there's no Fanas Makaris. Okay, so but after he came, there are lots of people who say that in cases when there's hefsem ruba, we're soimach on what the Ramos says that the ikar din is. The Chasam Sofer points out. He says every case that we have a shayla about a Davar Gush is always a b'diavad because the chatchilu were makbid that Blios happened in the klisheni. So every shayla is already a b'diavad. So our discussion of should we be makbid for this marshal, should we not be makbid, is always in case it's already b'diavad. So that's why I say that in case it hefsed meruba, people are going to be soimach on what the Rambam says, because in case of regular things, that's always shayla of cliches. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about is just tell you some within this side that you should be makbid for Davar Gush, some thoughts or some ideas of point have to be straightened out. Okay, the first like this. Well, if you think of a Davar Gush, so what comes to mind is a piece of meat. Okay, like a solid chunk of meat or something like that. Okay, but that's not the case that the Marshal says. I think that the Daki Moshe talks about a piece of meat, but the Marshal says the case is Oyriz v'doichen, okay, which means rice and millet. Okay, whichever one you hold is which one. Okay, Oyriz v'doichen. Okay, so if that's the Marshal's case. So if I would have said that to you, you would think, well, I would when I read the first time, I thought that meant is like a pot of rice, okay, or a pot of millet. I'm not exactly sure what millet looks like, but probably looks like rice. That's what mean, just like a pot of rice, something like that, okay, and that would be enough to be considered Davar Gush, okay. But when I saw inside the shach,
on that the shach was factored, right? On those
On what?
On
So that's what I'm about to tell you. The Shach, when he talks about it, I don't have the Shach on the screen here. The Shach, when he talks about it, says no. He talks about being tzlulim. The Chacham Zon says that the Urz that the Marshal was talking about was that Mushal and Bishul of she'enim nishpachim karoitiv. Okay, it's still not 100% clear. To me, it's more like close to like a rice kugel. It's like a solid chunk. Okay, that Mushal and Bishul of doesn't sound like you cooked up a pot of rice, right? If you didn't have to say what is bishul of for a pot of rice, it sounds like you made it mamish like a porridge, like some or not porridge, it's too watery, like a kugel, like something like a chunk, more like what we would have guessed was a Davar Gush before I told you that the Marshal says that. We would have guessed that it means is like a piece of meat. It's a big chunk, as opposed to a pot of rice, like a pot of rice that you'd eat, just a plain pot of rice. Not so clear to me that means that qualifies as Davar Gush. Okay, and in Ramosha. In Ramosha, he says like this. He's talking about Hilchos Shabbos. We'll get to it in a minute. He says oichel and mashke is not in Hilchos Tumah Tyra there are rules and it has nothing to do with this over here. He said it has to be to be not a davar lach, it has to be davar zav, something that would pour, or davar shu chaticho haimedes umudubekes yachad, if it's like held together. Af beloy kli hamamidin umudavkon. Okay, they would stick together if not with a kli holding it. So like a piece of meat doesn't need a pot to hold it together. A kugel doesn't need a thing to hold together. I'm not sure what he thinks about when you talk about like a pot of rice. Doesn't hold together either, but it doesn't need the kli that's like sort of in the middle there. Okay. Anyhow, so that's not so clear exactly, but it sounded to me more like what my, so to speak, havmina would have been. What you classically think of a Davar Gush as a solid piece, that's what we think of. Now, in that, relevant to us, Rosh Hashanah was once asked about potato chips and corn chips, and he said, no, those are not Davar Gush. Even though a potato we think is a Davar Gush, he says, but they so much don't hold on to their heat. The point here is that Davar Gush is not cooling off. It's so much. He said, now he was talking about tumblers, which we'll talk about in the future. How to kasher a tumbler. Next time we do this kind of stuff. So he said potato chips. He said even corn chips. Kuf, ayin, aleph, reish, nun. Even corn chips he didn't think were kind of Davar Gush. Not because they're not solid, because they are solid, but because they cool off so quickly.
It's too small. Too
thin. You could use that word. But his point was they don't retain their heat. They don't. They. So the whole idea of Davar Gush is that it stays hot and it doesn't. It's not having this feature of cooling off.
It's like a separate head almost.
Right. It's the same style. It's the same. Sorry, what I'm saying that they're saying Davar Gush is the walls are not cooling it off, and he's saying but there are other things that might be gush, but they're being cooled off just because they just cool off automatically. You know what I mean? So yeah, okay. It's not a heter. Remember. Really, the rule is it's klivish and klisheni. That's the original din. That's the original din. The Marshal is the chumrah, not the ikwet. Okay. Now we're gonna have a question on this in a second, but let's okay. Now the next is what happens if we have a Davar Gush that's in water. Okay, so there's a sefer called Teres Asham, written by Tosis Yantif. Okay, it's a pirush on Teres Chatas from the Rama, and he says if you have a solid thing floating around in a liquid, he says it's not a Davar Gush. He says the solid might be a Davar Gush, but this solid is floating around in a liquid. We said the whole point is that it doesn't have the finest Kashrus. He says, the liquid is connected with the walls. So the solid that's the floating around the liquid is considered, that is also the finest Kashrus. Okay? But the Shach says not like that. Okay, and the Shach says a case. I can't explain to you really what the Shach says, but I'm going to tell you. But L'Inyanenu, the Shach, his case is you have a fly in soup. Okay, and the Shach says that would be an example of a Davar Gush. Okay, now because the fly is gush, and the soup is keeping it in touch with all the liquid that's floating around in it. Okay, now for the life of me, I don't understand why the fly is Davar Gush. I just told you potato chips are not Davar Gush, right? So the fly, you think, cools off a lot faster than that. It's hard to wrap your head around that what it is. But I'm sort of going to ignore that for now. I don't understand what that means. But this point is, but.
Because the Shechta said it's Chiddush, so it's a Kashering of Shechta, not a Kashering of
No, because okay, should I say it like that? You want to say it like that? Okay, you say it how you like to. Is that what you thought of? I told you before about pots of rice. Okay, do you think that 1 grain of rice was a Davar Gush? So what the fly is like 5 grains of rice? Like how big is a fly? You know what I mean? So you don't If that makes you happy, but I'm bringing here the shach for the other side, which is he's saying the shach is saying not like the stars Hashem. Who's saying is that even though it's floating around the water, the fly is the fly and the water is the water, like as if two separate things. Okay, now for our last thing is we talk about well, almost our last thing, basically our last thing. We're talking about learning Yerdeh. So we think about Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni and Davar Gush, Indian Blios transferring back and forth. Okay, what about for Bishul for Shabbos? Okay, it's switched to Aruch for Bishul for Shabbos. I told you the Magen Avraham says. I mentioned Magen Avraham before, and we're going to get to really what he says in a second. He says that just like it works for Blios, it works for Bishul also on Shabbos. So you can't if something is a Davar Gush, even though it's not in the Kli Rishon anymore, still we mivash on Shabbos, which is l'chumra, the iser. You can't put food onto it on Shabbos because it'll be mivash. Okay. Chavos says is not true. There's not true. Just because Blios happened, just because there are Blios doesn't mean that there's going to be Bishul on that. Okay, and on that, so let me the Chavos says in order to have Bishul. In order to have Blios, you just have to have not defined as Makaras. In order to have Bishul, you have to have defined as Machamamais. Okay, you have to go to another extreme. Those are not words on Taisus. You have to have it's not clear how you read Taisus, but you have to have that the walls with heating the food in order to make Bishul Indian Shabbos. And it says that doesn't happen because there's no defined as Makaras, but we're out of the Kli Rishon. Okay, so now let me show you now what the Magen Avraham says really. Okay, and you tell me what you think. This is what the Mechaber says. This is Mechaber Aruch. He says you can't put oil onto broiled food while it's Keneged Hamadura because it's going to get cooked. Okay, so if you're putting this oil onto the food, you can't put it onto the food because it's going to get cooked. Okay, now if you read that, it says it should be Ba'odei Keneged Hamadura while it's by the fire. Okay, so that sure sounds like it's the Isser when he's telling you not to do this because it's going to be Vashal is because it's a Kli Rishon. Okay, and to that the Magen Avraham says Lav Dafka doesn't only mean Keneged Hamadura. Okay, do it then if it would be Reseach Yatzalah display. He says like if you see in your day it says that a Davar Gush. Should say Kashering, not Klishanu, but Kashering is Mavashal and the Kashering also. So this is the Magen Avraham who says that Kashering that Davar Gush also makes Bishul also the Indian Shabbos. Okay, but maybe I'm reading it wrong. He's not explaining the Mechaber, right? He's arguing on the Mechaber. Okay, so what I'm saying, this Chavos is true. The Mechaber says Keneged Hamadura, and the Magen Avraham says no, Lav Dafka. What do you mean Lav Dafka? Lav Dafka. The Mechaber didn't have just extra room on the line, so he wrote Keneged Hamadura, right? Because
so the first part he's not arguing with Mechaber.
He's not.
First part is Chayri saying a Kli Rishon that's no longer Alaish. But then you got in the Kli Rishon no longer Alaish.
Because why would it work if it's a Kli Rishon that's not Alaish? You can't cook in a Kli Sheni because it's Davar Gush. Okay, because the Paiskim did Davar Gush.
It's just Kli Rishon that's not Alaish. Still a Kli Rishon,
because
it's just not Alaish.
V'chein Kasha Paiskim the Davar Shu Gush. I
think and now comma one that's number one and two. V'chein Kasha Paiskim this is ready. This is Taka Paiskim your day, which is not. This is ready, not necessarily like the Mechaber that Davar Shu Gush. Going according to these places, I'm adding on also Davar Gush, which is that part is talking not like the Mechaber, but the first part.
Whichever part you like, the Mechaber said it's only by its only when it's a Kli Rishon. So even the Mechaber didn't hold of Davar Gush.
No, but I think that Lav Dafka he is saying the Mechaber will agree to. He just once he gets past that first sentence, then he's, no, not necessarily.
Say again.
Say again.
That was heated on the fire doesn't become is not like a Davar Gush where it was heated.
Why did the Mechaber say it has to be Keneged Hamadura?
So Magen Avraham says Lav Dafka on that.
Well, why did the Mechaber say that? Why did the Mechaber say it if it was Lav Dafka?
That's a good question.
No, it's not a good question because he's saying Kleimer as in like I'm disagreeing with him.
Because his main point of the Mechaber is not to tell you what's Mavashal now, what's not Mavashal. He just wants to make you aware of just because something is already completely cooked, you can't start sticking on other things, eating on shemen and shumen, wherever it's mavashal. I'm not getting into now what's mavashal, what's not mavashal. I'm just telling you, be aware that adding on little things to your cooked food is a problem.
I'm not. I don't think it's a great way to read it, but okay, if you want. Okay, I just thought that the Mechaber was sound like the Chavos that there's that it doesn't work. It doesn't work, or either it doesn't work for Bishul, or that the Mechaber doesn't hold Davar Gush. the Machaber that I know of doesn't talk about whether Davar Gush has the din of
But what a
Blios.
sure is also no. Still hot, and a Kalishin is in the Kalishin that's taken off the fire. That should be also. So why does Machaber say connected?
Al Hatzli means on the food. It's
but oidoi connected Hamadura.
Right.
So
you have a middle case, which is if I kept it in the Kalishin and I took it off the fire.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not.
That's the Magen Avram's Kashering. Magen Avram's Afil Klisheni Mevashal, the Kashering Tzli. The Tzli was heated directly on the fire. The first case is that it was a Davar Gush heated in the Kli.
Right.
It was Mevashal in the Kli, but now it doesn't have its liquid and it's Davar Gush.
Okay.
So Kashering Tzli. So it could be that the Magen Avram would only be put. I mean, you could say the Chiddush of the Magen Avram and only pull over the Chiddush by Tzli. I think maybe some
say that Tzli is special. So Tzli is special because there was no Kli Rishon in the first place. That's such a thing. Okay, maybe that's what it means. Okay, you can take your like. The Chassam Sofer has this interesting in between here, and he says is Davar Gush for Bishul for Shabbos works even if it's not in the Kli Rishon, but not when it's in the Kli Sheni. Okay, like if it's in transit, before it gets to the Kli Sheni, then it can still be Mavashal. But when it gets to the Kli Sheni, now it can't be Mavashal anymore. Okay, I guess then we have.
When could it be Mavashal?
Even if it's out of the Kli Rishon, it can still be Mavashal before it got to the Kli Sheni.
It's being married.
Like it's in transit. Like I'm not sure exactly. I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it's like a funny kind of in between. But when it hits the Kli Sheni, then he's like the Mekilim that it would not be Mavashal. Okay. The what?
Or is this
Yeah, in Tzadi Hey. I think the Piskachur brings best, I don't remember. But it's in your day, Tzadi Hey. So the Mishbura says you should be makbid on this. He says the Chatchili you should be makbid to say that Davar Gush even causes problems with Bishul. But he says, but the Evid, if you did it already, you could eat the food. So we're not makbid. If you've been vashal on Shabbos, it would be usher. The food would be usher. He says, no, don't be makbid on it, but the Evid if that happened. Or Shachta told us the same thing. Also, Le'inyan, the question was if they could put spices onto knedlach into soup after it was taken out of the pot, not in the pot. So this is two things. This is first of all, it's a salad floating around in a liquid. To be makbid on that, the salad was floating around the liquid. The knedels in soup, right? It's not sitting in a by itself. And to be concerned about Bishul on Shabbos for that case also. Again, there's the point with to put spices or whatever onto that also. And Ramosha says also to be makbid in a chatchila way, but he says, but if there's other tzirufim you could be makel. In his case, to be makel there is about ketchup, okay? Because there to be makbid, you have to say, let's put ketchup onto a Davar Gush on Shabbos. So there you have to be makbid. There's two things. You have to be makbid on this possibility that Davar Gush is mavashal for Shabbos. That's one thing. And on top of that is that yesh b'shal chabishal. Okay, because the ketchup was cooked already in the factory, so it would be yesh b'shal chabishal. He says so that to be makbid on both those together. He says that you don't have to do that. Okay, and my really last thing, which is going to take me a second, is just that even those who hold that Davar Gush, back to your dad, even those who hold that Davar, you want to, is like a Kli Rishon, agree that when you kasher it, you don't kasher like it's a Kli Rishon shlei gabi eish. So we kasher it like a Kli Rishon shlei gabi eish. We talked about this in a Gol's Kalim. Even though it might have a better status than a Kli Sheni, but it's not a Kli Rishon shlei gabi eish. L'inyan HaGol's Kalim.